Well, there are a couple of updates which I'd like to address before I get into the main topic of this video. First of all, I don't know if you were able to notice this or not, but I have an intro now, which I didn't have before, and this was provided to me by a very good friend of mine named Latrice Williams. And I know that the intro itself is pretty simple, but you know, everything that you've seen me do on this channel so far has been done through a smartphone, and there are pretty severe limitations as far as what I can do with this bit of technology, in terms of editing and whatnot. So to Latrice, I know I've said this about 6 times already, but thank you very much for the intro. And excuse me if I stumble throughout this video, but it's getting late, and as soon as I upload this thing, I am hitting the sheets. Anyway, Latrice actually has a couple of channels here on YouTube that you can check out. I'm going to put some links to them in the description. First of all, she's got one called Severe Ignorance, which essentially covers a lot of things regarding black culture and, black history. And I've learned some pretty interesting things from it, like apparently the banjo, which is so heavily iconic in American culture, was an African invention. And I just learned about this woman named Nanny, who was apparently a very exceptional military commander. So if you're interested in learning about that sort of thing, definitely check the channel out. And then she's got another one which has a similar format where you see these graphics with a little bit of music with Latrice narrating over them, but they cover very different topics. Her other channel is called Urban Underdogs, and it seems as though she basically talks about characters in comic books and whatnot. Like, she did a video where she gave a review for Batman the Animated Series and talks about why it works so well and why Batman is such a great character. And then she did a video about the character of Doctor Doom and why he needs like a better hero to go against than the Fantastic Four. And she does rate some pretty interesting points on this channel. I like it. And she's a pretty pleasant person to listen to. So once again, if you're interested, check that stuff out. And then the other update that I have isn't really a huge deal, I guess, but as you can see, my background has just gone through a more drastic change than usual. And the reason for this is that I decided, since I cover a wide variety of genres in my movie reviews, I shouldn't just have like horror merchandise sitting there in the background. It should just have a movie theme in general. Of course, some of the stuff that you see isn't necessarily movie stuff, like this alien snow globe right here is something that has a lot of sentimental value to it. Like, it doesn't reference any kind of movie. So while some of these other figures might be subject to change, they might be switched around for other things in the future, that is going to remain a part of my background, unless it gets broken, in which case I will be crying all night long. So, on to the main topic of this video. As the title says, this video is about my favorite films by my favorite directors. And there are a lot of filmmakers out there who get some deserved credit for their work, like Steven Spielberg, Brian De Palma, Martin Scorsese. Great filmmakers. I was also quite a fan of Tim Burton for a while, but I decided to just whittle it down to 5 filmmakers who, whenever they come out with a new movie, no matter what the critics say, no matter what my friends might say, I am going to go see that movie. And these are directors who I've talked about in the past, so there is kind of a risk of being a little repetitive here. Like in my Q&A video, I did talk about some favorite directors, but I'm going to start off with someone who I don't recall mentioning at all in that video, and that would be Peter Jackson. And, you know, a lot of people may cite, like, the Lord of the Rings trilogy as their favorite. Some people might even say the Hobbit movies, to which I would not give any argument. Those are definitely more than fair choices, but personally, for me, the one that has the most entertainment value, the most rewatch value, even though Peter Jackson himself has disowned it as just some piece of garbage that he did when he was younger and more naive. But, you know, just a film that makes me consistently happy every time I watch it. And I'm not talking about Dead Alive, even though that was an awesome movie as well. I'm talking about his first film, Bad Taste. I just love the energy of that movie. I just love how there's so little dialogue in it, and that it's just constantly in motion, with this very simplistic setting. I love the comedy. I love the gross out moments. I love the action. There's really nothing I dislike about that movie. Next up is Kevin Smith. You know, I've gone on about him before, so I'm not going to say too much else. Again, I don't want to risk being too repetitive here, but when it comes to just my all-time favorite movie by him, some of you might be surprised that it's not one of his horror movies, but the one that I personally love the most is Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Again, it's one of those movies that just makes me consistently happy. I just love how weird it is, how over the top it goes, how it just kind of hops from place to place with the main characters. And, you know, Jay and Silent Bob, if I had to pick like a favorite comedy duo of all time, they would be it. And it is unfortunate that they haven't really been in any more recent movies. There is, of course, the high possibility that they may be in the next Clerks movie, as well as the Mallrats sequel that's coming up. But Kevin Smith kind of decided a while back that they'd overstayed their welcome, so the fact that he's kind of returning to those two films is pretty interesting. Hopefully he'll be able to, you know, pull off that magic once again. Personally, I even enjoyed the second Clerks movie, which a lot of people consider to be one of the worst films. So, you know, I don't think I'm going to be too hard to please. If I end up disliking those movies, then you know they're going to be pretty terrible. Up next is Quentin Tarantino, the king of dialogue. For a while, I considered Pulp Fiction to be his best movie, which, you know, is still a pretty fair argument if someone says that's his best movie or even the greatest film ever made. I'm not going to argue against that because it is a really amazing film. But, again, just going back to rewatch value, a movie that I've watched a few more times since I made that claim about Pulp Fiction, and I've just loved it even more with every single viewing, would be Inglourious Basterds. I don't know, there's something about the World War II setting which I find pretty interesting. Like, I'm more interested in seeing movies that take place during that time period than, say, World War I or Vietnam. Even though Full Metal Jacket, of course, a Vietnam movie, was amazing. But I also love the comedy in it. I thought that Brad Pitt was absolutely hilarious in the movie. I love the job that Eli Roth did as the Bear Jew. And of course, the villain of that movie, the Jew Hunter, was freaking awesome. One of my all-time favorite movie villains. And that's pretty much all I've got to say about it, so moving on. Terry Gilliam is up next, and I just want to make it clear for the record that I'm not necessarily listing these guys in order from least favorite to most favorite or anything like that, and it doesn't even pertain to the order of movies that I'm mentioning as my favorites. I just, as I said at the beginning of the video, it's just 5 filmmakers who I happen to really enjoy. Anyway, my all-time favorite film by Terry Gilliam, which is actually a pretty popular choice from what I've heard other people say, it would be his classic science fiction film, Brazil. I don't know, there's just not a whole lot for me to say about this movie except that it's amazing. I love the visual style of the film. I love how it can be very funny, but also very dark. None of the humor, none of the darkness ever feels out of place. And it's just such a really mad film to watch. I don't know, it's really just impossible for me to describe how unusual and insane this movie is. If you haven't seen it, then, obviously it comes highly recommended. Finally, there is Guillermo del Toro. When it comes to my favorite film by this guy, first of all, I'm pretty sure that I've mentioned this in my Q&A video before, but of course some of you may not have seen that anyway, so I first learned this guy's name instantly after seeing the first Hellboy movie. I thought it was one of the greatest superhero movies ever made, and I've just been checking his stuff out more and more ever since then. Obviously you can see the Angel of Death up there from the second Hellboy movie. But when it comes to my favorite, I actually prefer his Spanish language films over all the rest. And this was a pretty close tie for me. A very close second would be The Devil's Backbone. Amazing film. Very creepy, very emotionally involving. As was the case of Brazil, it's kind of hard to explain the movie. Just check it out. But I would have to pick Pan's Labyrinth just for its rewatch value, the very strong emotional content, the storytelling, and of course the amazing visual effects. I was just, when I first saw that movie, I expected it to be like more of this epic kind of fantasy film along the lines of The Lord of the Rings. I remember there had been a critic who compared it to those movies, and again, I thought it was just referring to the amount of action that was going to be going on, but really it was more about the quality that the film had going for it. And it wasn't the film that I expected, but still I was just completely blown away by it. How it was able to mix those fantasy elements with a very dark sort of melodrama. So, that's the end of my list. I'm tired as hell. My next video is going to be talking about my least favorite films by these guys. And so stay tuned for that. I hope y'all have a good one.